When you're a borderline technophobe and you have to play a tech savvy guy. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to finish this discussion of cost and choice from chapter 3. One piece of good news for you is that I decided we're going to skip chapter 4. So chapter 4 is out. So you're not going to be reading it for this class. You can take a look at it, but I'm going to condense some of the important information from chapter 3 in today's lecture. So the homework that will be posted today by 5 o'clock will contain only the stuff from the first three chapters. So there are a couple of things remaining from last time to be discussed today, a couple of concepts that we have to familiarize ourselves with. The first one is the concept of substitution in economics. That's one of the key substitution ideas necessary to understand well not only consumer behavior, but also many other things, including production and exchange, competition, and so on. Concept of substitution, now maybe the key idea. It is not very well covered in your chapter 3, so I appeal to you to follow closely the discussion of this problem today, problem of marginal utility. Concept number 3 is, we can call it differences in preference. Differences. When your rhyming is inadvertent, that means that you're a bad poet. So, difference in preferences. Different people have different preferences, and that has far-reaching implications for the problems of exchange and trade. This is the abbreviation of chapter 4. Instead of giving you a very complicated and convoluted and detailed story about this problem, I decided just to give you one snapshot of the argument. To make a long story short, exchange and trade wouldn't have been possible if people's preferences were identical. We can exchange and trade stuff only because we have different preferences about the same objects. Concept number 4, or principle number 4, people could be altruistic, people could be generous, but not in the market. Altruistic, but not in the market. And finally, having all this in mind, we're going to try and give a more precise definition of utility maximization. Okay, so these are the basic things for today. So let's start first with substitution. Substitution is a phenomenon that permeates human choice in economic markets or in the daily lives. That means that at a certain price, every commodity or every product could be substituted or changed by something else. It's very rare situation that something is irreplaceable. So the logic of substitution permeates the whole entire choice. When you're buying certain things, you like a product very much, and you're ready to pay even more than you're paying right now. But at a certain price, you're going to decide that you will not buying it anymore. I like orange juice very much, but at a certain price, I would probably switch to apple juice, or to nothing, or to beer, which is also somewhat like. So substitution means that the character of our preferences for goods and services is conditional. It's conditional. It depends on the sacrifices that we have to make in order to acquire that particular good. And let's say if we have a bundle, if we consume a bundle of goods, or let's assume for a moment that we consume just two goods, let's say apples and oranges. We can say that there will be a substitution ratio, that there will be certain principle of substitution between them that will tell you what is the relative value of two of them for me. And this law or this principle is called this marginal rate of substitution. What is that? That means that if I want to acquire one more apple, let's say that my income is fixed. I can buy 10 apples and 15 oranges. So obviously, if I were to acquire or to exchange with somebody 11th apple, I will have to sacrifice some oranges. So how many oranges I would be ready to sacrifice in order to acquire one new apple is called the marginal rate of substitution. That means how many competing goods I'm ready to sacrifice in order to get one more. Marginal means one more or one additional. So now I'm going to tell you something that I cannot right now explain why. I don't need first to explain you this concept marginal utility in order to explain fully what I'm just about to say. But this marginal rate of substitution is declining. As you try to increase your stock of apples, the maximum quantity of the competing goods that you're ready to sacrifice will go down. For the first unit, you'll be ready to pay the most in terms of other goods that you sacrifice, and for every next unit, you will be ready to sacrifice less and less. So this marginal rate of substitution the number of competing goods that you're ready to sacrifice to acquire one more good that you increase your possession of is declining. Diminishing. So you see the logic of substitution. Obviously, this is the phenomenon of exchange. You are exchanging two different goods, one for the other, and you can talk about the rates of substitution between them, the exchange ratios. How many oranges for one additional apple? That's the basis for talk about exchange. But also substitution. The logic of substitution could be applied to a variety of other settings, such as, for example, competition. You'll see that. What's going to happen if the price of aluminum increases 50%? What do you think? What the consumers or users of aluminum will do? What other people will do as a consequence of that? We'll say more about that next week, but just the basic idea, the basic intuitive idea.
If it increases, they'll probably buy things with other materials.
Other materials, yeah. So the logic of they will probably substitute away from aluminum. They will try and find an alternative good that can satisfy the same need. So the substitutes are the goods that can serve the same human needs approximately well. So one example of this is that some of the newest commercial airline aircraft, like Boeing 787, the Dreamliner, and Airbus 350, they're made completely out of synthetic materials. They've got no aluminum. Usually the planes are made of aluminum. 777, 737, all models of Airbus, all of them are made predominantly of aluminum. The newest aircraft were made of synthetic materials that can serve as well or even better than aluminum. So we don't know to what extent this innovation was prompted by higher prices of aluminum, but you can bet that Boeing or Airbus wouldn't build their airplanes with an inferior or more expensive material. So many other areas you have the same logic. I like apple juice, but if its price increases 3%, I'm gonna switch at some point to something else. And this has profound implications for many other ideas. Let's say monopoly. So how would you define monopoly? Give me just the definition of monopoly.
Somebody that's got a market corner.
Somebody who's got a market corner. That means, what does that? What would that mean?
Like they don't have any competition.
Yeah, they got no competition. I'm the only producer. Imagine I monopolize the entire production of oranges in the world. I have patent to oranges, and I'm the only guy who harvests oranges and makes orange juice. Nobody else can make orange juice in the world. I'm an absolute monopolist. And I'm the only one selling orange juice, and I'm charging $100 per gallon. I'm a monopolist. Or am I? What do you think? Should the government pass antitrust law to control my behavior because I'm an evil monopolist?
Only if you're abusing it.
Only if I abuse it. How can I not abuse it? How would you define abusing my monopolistic position?
I suppose charging or
charging very high prices.
Right,
Let's say that I decided to charge very high prices. Would I be a monopolist? Is it likely? Is it necessary for me to be a monopolist? Well, How? How so? I mean, John gave us pretty much the textbook definition of monopoly, the only firm serving the market. If you define the market as market for apple juice, I'm a monopolist. But something, you see that something is fishy here. That it doesn't sound very likely that somebody who monopolizes the orange juice market will be a real monopolist.
Is it because it's not really a needed good?
Yeah, sort of. What does that mean? It's not really a needed good.
Well, you don't need apple juice. You can just
Or-
substitute it with orange juice or grape juice.
So substitutes. It's very likely at a certain price, very few people are so crazy about orange juice that they would keep buying the same quantities of orange juice if the price was tripled or quadrupled or quintupled. What is it? Forget. Increased 5 times. So the substitution, the logic of substitution prevents one single monopolistic firm from maintaining their monopolistic position for a very long period of time. So substitutes are everywhere, and everything can serve as a substitute for everything else. Another example. Some people believe that you're going to increase employment of poor people if you increase the minimum wage. Or if you reduce the immigration in the United States of America, domestic employers will be forced to pay higher wages. What is the problem? That's a classical anti-immigration argument, economic anti-immigration argument. We have more people coming in, the same number of employers, the same resources, greater supply of labor, the same demand for labor, the price of labor will go down, wages will go down. That's one theory. Another theory is another idea about, so the way to increase wages is to prevent immigrants to come. Another idea, increase minimum wage, then the employers will pay higher wages to poor people and everybody will be happy. Now, one of the problems with that is that there is substitution among the factors of production all the time. Everything is a substitute for everything. A shovel and a machine compete against the human laborer. So imagine that you can sell a hamburger in McDonald's by employing somebody to work for 10 bucks minimum wage, human labor. Imagine now that you can substitute this worker with a machine, but the machine costs you $12 per hour to rent it or to buy it. Are you going to substitute the worker with the machine at $12? No, you're not, because you're not stupid. But now let's say the government comes along and says you have to pay 15 bucks minimum wage, you greedy exploiter of labor. You have to provide decent living wage to your workers. $15. What are you gonna do? Are you going to really employ somebody who is worth $10 per hour to you, to your business, and pay him or her 15 bucks? It's not very likely. What is more likely is actually that you're going to employ somebody who is really worth $15, some worker who is more productive, or more likely, what you're going to do, you're going to switch to machine. Now, what was a losing proposition now becomes profitable, because your alternative now is not between paying 10 bucks per hour to worker or 12 hours for a machine. Now your alternative is between paying somebody $15 who is worth $10 to you and paying $12. So you would be losing then $2, not $5. So this substitutability of the factors of production. That's one of the phenomena that many economically illiterate or semi-illiterate people don't understand. That's why they propose sometimes stupid policies that might seem nice at the surface, but when you take into account the fact that employers can substitute between different factors of production, they don't make sense. So in a certain sense, you can say that both on the consumer market, everything competes against everything. So not only apple and orange juice How about beer? Let's say that all fruit juices increase 100% in prices. Is non-alcoholic beer a substitute for orange and apple juice? Maybe. Is alcoholic beer a substitute? For me, it is. For some people, it's not. For my father, apple juice is not a substitute for beer. But for me, they're mutually substitutable at a certain price or in certain conditions, depending. Wine, water. So see. I mean, my grandma was just kept pestering me all the time how spoiled we are because during the war they had to eat cornbread all the time. They didn't have wheat bread. So you don't know what real destitution and poverty was during the war. We had to eat cornbread, and we were so happy when I can eat normal bread. That was a feast. Believe me, cornbread in certain situations could be a very nice substitute for regular bread, although it doesn't seem so in most situations. Okay, so that's why substitution as a concept is important, because it permeates all facets of human action, from everyday decision making about where to go and what to do, to our decisions about what to consume and how much, to our decisions whom to employ, whether to add one more worker or one more machine to our production process. Without this, nothing would work. Okay, marginal utility. Now, marginal utility. So one of the things that I could not quite explain you completely is this connection between substitution and exchange and trade. Now I'm going to try and do that with the concept of marginal utility. So what is marginal utility? Marginal utility means the value or satisfaction that we derive from consuming one more unit of a given good. And you will see that the same principle, the same marginal principle, is a key not only in consumer theory. In consumer theory, we call it marginal utility. Theory of consumer behavior, why people spend, why people consume, how much, why, and so on. That's what we are doing, what we are dealing with now. But also in production theory, the concept is marginal productivity. So as we make our decisions about consumption, not on the basis of how an abstract class of goods, bread, orange juice, coffee, contributes to our satisfaction, but on the basis of how much one additional unit benefits us as compared to other things that we have to sacrifice. In the production theory, we gauge whether we should employ a worker or not on the basis of how much this one additional unit of a factor of production of labor or a machine or a raw material contributes to our profitability. So the equivalent to consumer satisfaction in consumer theory is profitability in theory of production. And the equivalent to marginal utility is marginal productivity. How much my profitability will increase if I add one more worker? If it will go down, if my revenue will go down, that means that you are what's called a negative marginal value worker, somebody who has less than zero marginal productivity. You don't contribute anything, you're actually subtracting from the revenue. Then the person will not be. This person here is a negative marginal product, negative marginal productivity. Okay, so that's just basic intro. Don't lose sleep over that too much right now. For now, we're going to concentrate on marginal utility. Imagine now, just to illustrate for you what is the basic gist of marginal utility. The law of marginal utility says that as you increase the stock of a certain consumer good, which means if you keep buying additional units of a certain good, the value of every additional unit declines. You can say marginal utility declines or diminishes if you're increasing the stock of that good, if you are accumulating the units. Declines if quantity of that good that is available to you increases. That's the most usual formulation of the law. Usually in textbooks they say marginal utility is diminishing or decreasing. But the important caveat here is the proviso is that only if the quantity of that good at your disposal increases, while everything else is kept constant. As the marginal utility goes down. Marginal utility increases. Now you can guess in which type of situation. When marginal utility of something will be increasing. If the available quantity of that good is going down. So marginal utility moves in the opposite direction of the available stock of good that you have. If the available stock increases, marginal utility goes down. If the available stock decreases, marginal utility goes up. Okay, why is that the case? I'll try to use one classic example to illustrate this. The classic example is the Robinson Crusoe economy. You know who Robinson Crusoe is. He got a bad reputation. It's considered to be a racist story. So Robinson Crusoe is a guy who is shipwrecked on a desert island. He doesn't have anything. He has to survive. And it's very often, it's been used, the example of Robinson Crusoe in the 19th century, in early 20th century, to illustrate some basic facts about economic decision making. Imagine what would Robinson do if he were alone, what he would produce and how much and so on. How Robinson Crusoe has to balance labor versus leisure, how Robinson Crusoe whether he will make some tools and implements to catch more fish and so on. I will be using a lot of these examples as we go along. But just to tell you, the Robinson Crusoe models of economics are sometimes very useful to isolate some basic concepts about economics because it's a very simple model. We go back to models, always models, useful simplifications. So there is nobody else bothering Robinson Crusoe. Now let's see what he would do. Okay, so Robinson Crusoe is on a desert island. And let's say that Robinson Crusoe needs wheat or corn. And he has 5 potential uses for sacks of corn. Let's say that he found some sacks of corn from some previous expedition on the island. He's alone. He has to survive for an indefinite period of time. Let's say that the first thing that Robinson Crusoe would do, that he has a value scale for which particular purposes he can use the sacks of corn. Let's say that they're of identical quality and quantity. Let's say that the first thing that he would do, obviously to make bread, to bake bread, to survive. That's the most important need that he has. Let's say then that the second use that he has for wheat or corn is to use it as seeds for the next season, because he's alone on a desert island, he has to survive next year. So if he had only one sack of corn, he will use it to bake bread. The second one for seeds to plant new corn, to sow corn for the next season. The third one is, let's say, to feed, if he finds some animals, let's say chickens or something else, to feed the animals, to supplement his diet. meat, some protein. Fourth unit, if he had a fourth sack of corn, he would have probably made some whiskey. And then the fifth one, he cannot figure out anything more sensible. Let's just feed birds, parrots, for fun. This is his value scale. Imagine now for a moment that he's got only one sack of corn. Which need will be satisfied first? For which purpose he would have used that sack of corn?
Bake bread.
Yeah, bake bread, because that's most important to him. If he's got second, it will be used for seeds, and so on down the line. So now what can you conclude based on this? You can conclude that the value of the first unit, of the first sack of corn, is the highest. Why? Because it serves to satisfy the most important need. And then you got the second sack of corn, it will be used because he is a rational utility maximizer. He wants to do what he considers to be the best thing for him at that point in time. Again, I always go back to my father. My father is considered this value scale particularly stupid because whiskey is too low on the list. But that's what Robinson Crusoe is. Feed animals, even lower. So then the birds would be taken care of only if he's got the fifth sack of corn. So that's the explanation why marginal utility is decreasing as you increase the stock of available goods, is actually that every additional subsequent unit serves less and less important needs. And that's why its marginal utility is lower than the marginal utility of the previous unit. Fourth unit is less important than the first unit because it serves to satisfy the fourth most important need. And now the other way around. Why marginal utility increases as you lose the units of a good? Imagine that he's got 5 units and then something happens, he puts them in a storage room, and whatever, some vermin or mice or rats eat one sack of corn. What's going to happen, do you think? It grows on. What's going to suffer? Which utilization out of these 5 is going to be on the chopping block? Seeds or baking bread? No, this one, the least important one. What's going to happen then if he loses the second unit? This is the first. He loses the second unit now. Whiskey will be on the chopping block. So what is the value? Is whiskey more or less important than feeding birds? Obviously more important. So then the marginal utility, as you lose, as you relinquish the units of a certain good, it doesn't matter how you lose it, by selling or by losing it, the remaining units will serve to satisfy increasingly more and more important needs. And that's why marginal utility increases as the scarcity of good increases. You see, once again, we go back to scarcity. Scarcity is correlated with marginal utility. When we say that something is more scarce, means that we can satisfy less of our needs with it. It's not that its quantity is necessarily very small or very large. It doesn't matter. It's always correlated with our needs. So, you decrease the quantity of a good, the marginal utility increases. And now we can go back here. That's the reason why the marginal rate of substitution is declining. Because marginal utility of apples decreases when you acquire the 11th apple. 11th apple is less important to you than 10th apple, because it will serve less important needs. That means that you will be ready then to sacrifice less oranges. In order, when you sacrifice oranges, the remaining oranges are more important to you. You see, if you're ready to sacrifice 2 oranges for 1 additional apple, that's the 11th apple. But then for the 12th apple, you would be ready to sacrifice less than 2 oranges, because the 12th apple is less important to you than the 11th. And on the other hand, you will be having now 13 oranges. So 13 oranges is worse than you lost 2 units. If you lose additional 2 units, that will be the marginal utility of the remaining 11 will be much higher. So your premium now for the 12th apple will be lower. You would be ready to sacrifice less oranges. You would probably stop acquiring apples, because the sacrifices that you have to make with oranges will be too high. See, so this is marginal utility decreasing here, marginal utility increasing, because you're relinquishing the units of apple. So sometimes wherever our stock can introduce another concept here, the basket of goods. Basket of goods. That means that all people want to have more than 1 consumer goods at the same time. All of us have a certain basket of goods at any one given point in time, including right now. What determines the composition of this basket of goods? Now we can say the marginal rate of substitution between different goods that we have. We reach the point when changing the composition of our basket of goods will require of us to sacrifice something that we don't want to sacrifice at that point in time. Okay. So basket of goods is the collection of consumer goods or other goods that we have with a given level of income that we have. And if we imagine that we just reproduce the same basket of goods every month, we have in macroeconomics something when they make the statistical analysis, what is it called? The basket of for the purposes of tracking inflation, basket of consumer goods. So the average, like a list of basic articles that every family consumes. That's one example of a basket of goods. So now, if we are to change the composition of this basket from one point to another, we will have to sacrifice. If we want to increase the quantity of apples, we will have to decrease quantity of oranges. That can happen only if our preferences change. And that happens very often. Our preferences change. We buy more of this and less of that. But at any rate, the marginal rate of substitution is a numerical mathematical measure of the relative values of different goods that we have at our disposal. Okay, any questions? Okay, but just briefly about the difference in references. This is actually simple at one basic level. We discussed it already. Pen for a wristwatch exchange situation that I mentioned during the first class. That trade produces value. trade is a production process. Exchange of goods and services is a production process. Why? Not because we produce anything new. The quantity and quality of available goods remains the same, but the distribution of goods becomes more in tune with the preferences of the people. If you have a wristwatch that you don't like, that you would have preferred to exchange for a pen, and I have a pen that I would have preferred to exchange for a wristwatch, this exchange will increase the utility of both of us. No new wristwatches and no new pens will be produced. The quantity and quality of goods remains the same, but they're better allocated among individuals to satisfy our preferences. If we haven't had different preferences about the pen and the wristwatch, there wouldn't have been any exchange. So then there wouldn't have been any opportunity to improve our subjective well-being by exchanging stuff. Then the only way to improve our subjective well-being would be to produce more. If I have a pen and I don't want to exchange it with you, you have a wristwatch, you don't want to exchange it with you, the only way how we can improve our satisfaction with these two goods is for one of us to acquire one more unit. And somebody would need to produce that one more unit. However, if our preferences are different, then we can make exchanges. So this is one side of the issue. Another side, again, analogy of this in the theory of production would be different productivity levels allow for specialization and division of labor. So that means even if I am more productive than you, let's imagine now that we are not exchange partners anymore, that we are now people who want to figure out how to make a new wristwatch and a new pen. And let's say that I'm 10 times more productive than you in making wristwatches and 5 times more productive in making pens. Who should produce pens? Who should produce wristwatches? Should I produce both? Why yes or why not?
You should always produce what you're most efficient at, right?
Everybody should produce what he's more efficient in. Who is more efficient in producing? Who is more efficient in producing watches? Who's more efficient in producing pens? I'm 10 times better in making watches and 5 times better in making pens.
In this case, you're more productive at both of them.
So just a louder, please.
In this case, you're more productive at both of them.
Yeah, but who is economically more efficient? That's technologically. Technologically, I'm better in both. But economically, more efficient is a person who can produce something at a lower opportunity cost. So what does that mean? I'll give you another example. I might have used it already. Jeff Bezos and janitor. Jeff Bezos needs a janitor. So there are 2 jobs, running a company and performing the janitor's work. Let's imagine that Jeff Bezos is 3 times more productive as janitor than any available applicant for the job. Who can produce the janitor services at lower opportunity cost? Jeff Bezos or janitor? Janitor. Why? Because Jeff Bezos is infinitely more productive as a CEO. If he works as a janitor for 3 hours or 6 hours and so on, the value that he will be losing by not working the same period of time as a CEO is infinitely higher. So then they should specialize, and Jeff Bezos should work 100% of the time by producing services of a CEO, and janitor should work as janitor. Because what is the alternative? What is the opportunity cost of janitor working as a janitor in the headquarters of Amazon.com? some similar job, probably less paid than this one because he wouldn't have applied for the job and he had some better opportunity. So the opportunity cost, the value that society loses by janitor working at the Amazon headquarters is far, far lower than the value that society loses by Jeff Bezos working. Even half the hours at Amazon headquarters. So here is the same thing, actually. You can, although you are you're 5 times less productive in making pens, we as 2 persons together would be losing much more by me producing both of them because watches opportunity cost, the watches that the number of watches that we would be losing would be 2 times as high. So I should specialize then in making watches, and you should specialize in making the pens. Now, this could be applied then to substitute Jeff Bezos and janitor and you and me with American workers and Chinese workers. We have the exact same principle. People can specialize and then exchange, produce more on the aggregate, and then exchange their surpluses and be better off. But you see, what is the precondition for that? The precondition of that is that there are differences in preferences and that there are differences in productivity. If we were equally productive, you and me, completely, there wouldn't be any incentive for us to specialize. I could produce a combination of watches and pens that is exactly as good as a combination that I can acquire if both of us specialize. We are equally productive. It doesn't matter whether I produce all watches and pens that I have, or maybe I produce just watches and then exchange them for 50% of pens. The stock, the basket of goods that I will be having, the basket of consumer goods that I have eventually at the end will be the same. So remember, this specialization and division of labor doesn't make any sense if everybody is equally productive. And on the other hand, the exchange of consumer goods will never have happened if people have the same preferences. If you and me have the same preferences about pens and wristwatches, no exchange will ever have to take place. Think about this. We didn't have time to. Why people cannot be altruistic in the markets? Can you give me just a quick, the top of your head, quick answer? Whether businessmen, businesswomen could be altruistic in their function as business people? What do you think? What would it mean for a CEO or an owner of the corporation to be altruistic with corporation's money? Could that kind of system function in the long run? Yeah, think about it. Go
It would
ahead.
just straight up fail.
It was fair. Why would it fail?
Well, they depend upon the business to make money, and if they're altruistic, they're probably not going to
Yeah, altruism means actually increasing costs. From an accounting point of view, altruistic behavior in business means cost-ineffective behavior. But that doesn't mean that you cannot be altruistic as a person. That's the catch. With your money, you could be altruistic. It's difficult to be altruistic with other people's money. That's the idea that you have to bear in mind. This ruthlessness of business people is not necessarily a sign of selfish or greedy personal character. It's a consequence of the necessity to make money, to perform efficiently for your shareholders. Okay. Any questions? Comments? Okay, nice. Have a nice weekend. See you all on Monday.